Hello and welcome to the Royal Roundup. You do usually see us on a Thursday, but this week you're going to see us on a Tuesday lunchtime instead. There's lots to discuss with Prince Andrew hitting the headlines again about where he's living at the Royal Lodge. Is he going to live there? Is he not? Well, we're joined by Daily Express's royal correspondent, Richard Palmer, who can give us all of the insights on these stories. Richard, welcome.
Hello.
It's extremely hot where we are in the UK at the moment. We're experiencing a bit of a heat wave alongside some thunderstorms as well at the same time. So, give you a bit of context as to our light, bright backgrounds at the moment. But Richard, it's not been too long since we last spoke, but this has been hitting the headlines for a few days now, and that is Prince Andrew and, of course, Sarah Ferguson do live at the Royal Lodge as of presently. They do still live there, but this has been a discussion that we keep on coming back to about whether they'll be able to stay there for much longer. But Prince Andrew is apparently very much putting his foot down on this.
Yes, you're right. I think it's very hard, as with so many royal stories, to get to the bottom of what's going on. I mean, Prince Andrew isn't speaking very often, if at all, directly to the media. He doesn't even have somebody handling press calls for him now officially. But as far as we can ascertain, there is pressure on him to give up Royal Lodge. And I think that pressure comes from at least a couple of points. One is, I think, just simply members of the family are looking at him and Fergie. Good day, Julia, to you in Canada. Julie, sorry, Julie. And just looking at this 30-room house, 7-bedroom house, and saying it's ridiculous that there's really just two people living there. Prince Andrew at one end of the house and his ex-wife living at the other end of the house. But more importantly, it's an expensive place to run. It's looking a little bit dilapidated, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think we've got a picture of it to give some context as well as to.
You've got a picture, yeah?
Yeah, I think we do. If we can pull up the picture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Queen Mother lived here before her death, and I think it got a little bit run down while she was living there. Andrew did give it a fresh lick of paint when he moved in and spent several £1 million on upgrading it. I think it was pink before he moved in, now white. But, I'm told that the paint, the whole facade needs redoing again, and that alone would cost about £1 million. There's talk of the roof needing doing, and possibly that work taking place this summer.
And I'm guessing because it's a royal residence, this would come out of public purse.
No, it wouldn't come out of public purse. I mean, there's a fairly senior royal source who's been saying, emphasising to me that this because he's no longer a working member of the family, that he isn't eligible for any taxpayer-funded support for his house. I'm not entirely sure how much he would have got in the first place, because it's, these things are so complicated. And I said to somebody the other day on Twitter that I always get the feeling that they're almost deliberately made complicated to blur the lines. But this house doesn't fall within what's known as the occupied royal palaces estate. So that estate, including Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, Clarence House, Kensington Palace, Palace of Holyrood House, Windsor Castle, and about 200 properties altogether, is taxpayer supported. But this isn't part of it. This is a separate residence that is leased to Andrew on a 75-year lease on a commercial basis, effectively, by the Crown Estate, which is a separate property.
I mean, obviously, the king, his brother, these are conversations which I assume they have together, and they've evidently got a very personal relationship here. So that obviously ties into all of this, which would, any human would realize that perhaps that causes a bit of tension within the family.
Yeah, but I think so. I think Andrew would have formally expected to get some support from the taxpayer for his
Mm.
office costs, and then also some support from his brother from the what's known as the privy purse.
Yeah.
Essentially, the monarch gets currently about £24 million a year from historic estate called the Duchy of Lancaster, and that money is used to support individual members of the royal family who don't get support from other means. So the Prince of Wales, Princess of Wales, they and their children get support from the Duchy of Cornwall estate. The rest of the royal family have to rely on the Duchy of Lancaster estate.
Mm.
And I think what's going on, reading between the lines, is that the king is saying, I can't support you like I used to be able to support you, or like your mother used to be able to support you. And you can't, I'm worried, are you going to be able to afford to stay there and do the maintenance work that's needed
Yeah.
on the property? And, I think Andrew is saying, I'm not moving, I will find a way. But nobody's quite clear whether
But
he's
is he,
going to do it.
obviously he's not a working royal anymore, Prince
No.
Andrew, but is the king afraid of public backlash if he did help his brother?
Well, I'm sure he will. I'm sure he will be helping his brother one way or another. I mean, I think, for example, Andrew still has police. Sorry, he has protection, not police protection, but he has private protection for his estate. And I think the king is helping him pay for that privately.
Right, okay.
He's no longer entitled to Scotland Yard protection, as far as we understand it. So again, the taxpayer isn't paying for that.
And this is a very odd setup, I won't lie. The actual setup of it, with a former married couple who live on either ends of the house. I mean, it does beg the question. They're obviously still quite close.
It does, and of course, some people speculate that they are sort of living there as a married couple.
I mean, I know lots of people who
insist that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people who would absolutely hate that idea of thinking of living with their ex would just be hell. So no, I find that the weird part of the story as well. And of course, Sarah Ferguson's got her own book deals and everything going on. And they're both, well, I guess she is most definitely earning her own money, and I'm sure she's doing quite well from those books, Richard.
Yeah, and she's got a £5 million house in central London that she's bought.
She still?
After selling off after they jointly sold off the ski lodge they had.
Right, so she's still got that.
Yeah, so that again, I think it's been suggested that she's bought that as an investment for her daughters. Really, it's really not clear what's happening with that property. Presumably, it's going to be rented out commercially.
But the daughters are still very much close to both their mother and their father, aren't they? Despite all of the headlines in the past few years.
Yeah, they are, and I think Eugenie particularly tends to stay at Royal Lodge at weekends when she goes to see her parents. I think. I mean, it has been suggested that Eugenie and Jack Brooksbank are still living at Frogmore Cottage because they did move in for a while, but I don't believe that's the case. Eugenie still has used Ivy Cottage at Kensington Palace, and so I think that's where they stay when they're in the UK. If they are using Frogmore Cottage, they are using it very discreetly because.
Yeah, well, of course, then all the headlines with Harry and Meghan would be coming out as well.
Yeah. So going back to Royal Lodge, I think the king is putting pressure on his brother to move to something smaller, more financially manageable.
Which would be
a lot of, apart from the financial support he gives him, he doesn't have a lot of leverage over that because he can't evict his brother from from Royal Lodge because, as I say, that's a Crown Estate property, and the
I mean,
monarch, the monarch is technically the owner of the Crown Estate, but only in name only. It's basically an independent property company that makes money for the government.
And how would he be able to afford all of these different maintenance issues with the Royal Lodge, given the fact that he's not a senior working royal anymore, and obviously everyone's quite tight-lipped about what he's doing these days, given the headlines of the past few years. Where's this income coming from?
I think that's a question the family are asking. Can he afford it? And I think he has private investments. Did he inherit money from his his parents? Well, probably not too much, because I suspect it was passed from monarch to monarch, but the king may have found a way of funneling some money towards him, in addition to what others have been given.
Complicated. Okay, and given the fact he's not a senior working royal anymore, I'm guessing we won't find out, because I guess it's not in the public interest more deeply into his finances.
Well, yeah, it's such grey areas, and the other thing about Royal Lodge is that it's technically it's up to the Crown Estate what happens to it. So if Andrew were to move out, Crown Estate could say, right, well, we're going to let that out commercially to a private individual. That's what he did with Fort Belvedere, which Edward VIII had as his sort of Windsor residence. And there's nothing to stop it doing that. But it has a long association with the royal family. George VI and then Queen Elizabeth used it, and then as the Queen Mother, she used it. There's obviously been speculation that the King wants to move William and Kate into Royal Lodge. Friends of William and Kate say that they're perfectly happy where they are at Adelaide Cottage on the Windsor estate. You could
also these kind of questions as well, I guess, kind of bring up within the family, well, who deserves where, and why do they get this and why do they get that?
Yeah, but in a way, I mean, I think it's quite embarrassing for the royal family that all of this is being discussed publicly, because they've got a surfeit of properties, as I think we've discussed before, and there are quite a few empty properties now lying around. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester's home at Kensington Palace, former home at Kensington Palace, for example, it's almost 4 years now that's been empty.
It's not a good look. It's not.
That's a sort of 21 room apartment. And when there is a homelessness crisis, when there is a financial crisis in this country, a cost of living crisis, it's some people might say it's not a great look for the royal family to have all these empty properties.
It's not. I think we've got a poll on this Prince Andrew debacle from the Royal Lodge, from our website, if we can bring it up. Should Prince Andrew vacate Royal Lodge now? Yes, 87%. No, 12%. So there we go. I think people's patience are slowly starting to run out with Prince Andrew, or maybe Richard. Do you think maybe it's run out a while ago now?
Yes, I think it did, really. Yes, I think there's no way back for him, and all he's got to look forward to really is a quiet life somewhere.
Yeah, I think there were some pictures of him from the weekend horse riding.
Yesterday he was out riding with Prince Edward. It's something they do very occasionally, and Pippa Bailey said, okay. They were out riding yesterday in the grounds of Windsor Castle. It's something Andrew does very regularly. Edward less so. I think he was practicing, because he's going to be riding a horse for the first time, certainly in my memory, at Trooping the Colour on Saturday, because he's now got the right to do that, because he's colonel of the 1st Battalion, the London Guards, which is a new formation. It's the it was what used to be called the London Regiment. It's basically it's a reserve army formation, but whereas it was a sort of just a reserve regiment before, it's now made up of reserve companies of the household division of the different guards regiments: Welsh Guards, Irish, Scots, Coldstream. Um, so I think I probably forgot one then, but I can't think what. Um, so yeah, he's going to be he'll be there riding on Saturday. So I think he was just getting some practice in with his brother. But interesting as well because I think it's whatever the public face of the firm, and clearly Andrew is not really a public part of the firm any longer. Blood's thicker than water, and they're still pretty close as brothers, I think.
Yeah, they seem to be, and Andrew hasn't seemed to have lost Fergie's friendship either. We'll move on now to Prince Harry and Meghan, and apparently they're not going to be releasing any more royal projects. We saw the Netflix series, we've seen the books, we've spoken about it all before, but apparently no more. That is the latest speculative line on these two. Richard, is there any truth to this? Will there be any more? Will there not be any more?
I think it does fall into rounds of speculation at the moment. There's been nothing official from them, and I have to say I would be surprised if there wasn't another memoir further down the lines, perhaps from Meghan or some project. But I think they're in a slightly difficult position. I mean, they're in a slightly difficult position, although they've had money rolling in, because clearly Harry's memoir Spare has done very well commercially, and they got a good deal with Netflix and Spotify.
Yeah.
But I guess those organisations might be thinking, well, what are we getting for our money? And it's a tricky area for them because I think after Spare came out, hot on the heels of the Netflix series, I think they suffered a bit of a backlash in the US as well as in the UK, and the US is clearly their main market. There seemed to be some evidence that the American public didn't take that kindly to Harry dissing his family quite so openly and brazenly, and there were various opinion pieces in some of the leading US newspapers suggesting that and magazines suggesting that the public there was getting a bit bored with him just having a go at more family all the time, and that they needed to move on. Problem for them is, what do they move on to? Because they are just, without the royal brand, without their connection to the most famous family in the world, they are nothing really. And
I mean, Meghan could go back to acting.
Yes, again, there's been some speculation about that, hasn't there? I mean, she seems more interested in producing,
but and politics as well, which obviously politics and royals mixing could be quite difficult.
Well, yes, and we saw that when Prince Harry came back the other week, and in his witness statement in the court case, talked about the British government being at rock bottom, which is really frowned upon. And I don't think that's helped with what I'm more primarily interested in, which is not. I'm not really that interested in what they do in America, what commercial projects they have or whatever. I don't think our readers are that interested. I don't think they're interested any longer in what charities they represent. But I think the interesting thing is when they do something that has an impact on the British royal family and how the British royal family reacts. And clearly, there has not been a warming of relations between Harry and his father and his brother, because when he came back, I know for sure that he did not meet William, and I'm pretty.
Is there any contact with them virtually? grandchildren with their grandparents, perhaps FaceTiming or video calls or anything like that, given the distance?
Well, I think there's clearly been a little bit of contact between the King um, and the Sussexes, certainly in the early part of the year. But again, the relations seem icy at the moment. The King was away in Romania when Harry came back initially, but he returned on Tuesday to London. But again, my understanding is the King didn't see Harry while he was back in the UK, and that's the second time at least that that's happened
Yeah.
in the trot. So it suggests that all is not well, and there's no sign of the much vaunted reconciliation attempts that
No,
we've
no.
all written about it at various times.
But was Meghan ever close with any of the senior family at all?
Um,
Is
no,
there friendships there to be had? Because I've seen her stand next to Zara before, obviously not a senior working royal, and they seem to get along. And obviously, Princess Anne has a very good relationship still with Harry, I think, given, from what I can see, despite slight fractures.
yeah,
I just thought maybe that there was some kind of contact. And of course, Beatrice.
yeah. Beatrice and Eugenie, I think, are the closest to Harry and Meghan within the family,
Yeah.
and the rest, well, you know, pleasantries and I don't think they're completely out in the cold with the rest of the family, but there's a certain amount of reserve there because I think quite a lot of the family, they understand the pressures that couple have been under, and have some sympathy with them, but not with the way they've responded to that, and picked a fight with the British media and given up all their official responsibilities and headed off to live abroad. So, I
Yes.
don't, yeah,
Slightly awkward. I mean, Julie says that Charles needs to strip Harry of his titles. I mean, we've spoken about this before, haven't we, Richard?
well, we have, and again, you just have to remind people that the king has no power to strip any member of his family of a title. So that's something that would need to be done, I think, by an act of parliament.
Yeah, so it's
There
more.
might be a couple of other measures that could be done, but essentially, I mean, I'm sure if the king asked Parliament to do it, Parliament would do it, but he hasn't.
There would be that would be quite a scene, and I'm not sure Charles wants any of that kind of press again. To be honest, I'm sure his.
No, and there's also the problem, I think, for the king of setting a precedent then, and so once you've done it for them, do you then do it for Andrew? And
Yes, of
do you
course.
then come under pressure every time somebody
Slips up.
slips up in some way? Thank you. Yeah, slips up, and then because it inevitably, as you go down the years, they've all had their spells when they've been unpopular for one reason or another.
Yeah, and he knows that himself all
He
too
does
well.
from experience. Yeah.
Okay, we put this to a poll to our Daily Express Twitter for all of you Royal Roundup watchers. Do you want to see Harry and Meghan do more Netflix projects on the royal family? No, 88%. I think people might have had enough
Yeah.
of Harry and Meghan for a little while anyway. I think, but yes, Meghan's not wrote a memoir, so maybe that would be the next thing. And Meghan's memoir, bit of alliteration there. I could see publishers liking that. Anyway, we're going to move on from Harry and Meghan now. And we're going to talk about what Charles has been doing this week. Now, this is a train that I've always wanted to go on, Richard. The Royal Scotsman just looks amazing. It looks like something for a Harry Potter movie. I think it was used for the Harry Potter movies, actually.
I think the Flying Scotsman might have been used, yeah.
Incredible. But yes, he looked very happy to be there. It was one of those engagements that he actually did look like he was having quite a fun time at.
Yeah, I think so. And I saw I got a bit of feedback online when I tweeted about it yesterday. And clearly there are people with an agenda, people who don't want to see a monarchy, people in foreign countries, you don't really get it. Why was he there? Well, he was there marking the centenary of the Flying Scotsman, and that is it's the world's, I think it is fair to say, the world's most famous locomotive. Um, something worth marking, and also the 50th anniversary of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which is a sort of heritage railway line through some of the most scenic countryside in the UK. And of course, he visited Pickering as part the town of Pickering as part of that. Um, Brought a lot of joy to people who got a royal visit. It's what the royal family does, it's part of the happiness business, as they sometimes say, and brought a bit of light relief from everything else going on in the world to a little corner of North Yorkshire yesterday.
Yeah, and then obviously, it goes from one day to another, doesn't it? They have quite a sparse, different array of events. And of course, his son, the Prince of Wales, today we did briefly touch on this at the start of the programme. There's obviously a housing crisis at the moment, homelessness and cost of living crisis in the UK at the moment. And he was out today, wasn't he, Richard?
He was out today, William, attending the opening of a block of 33 flats for young homeless people in London, that's been built by Centre Point, one of the charities he's patron of. And this is such an issue so close to his heart. He was introduced to the whole issue by his mother when he was very young. They used to visit homeless shelters. She used to take the children to visit homeless shelters.
Do you think he picks a lot of what he goes to with a lot of influence from what his mum used to do?
Well, certainly it's one of a number. I mean, last week we saw him at the Royal Marsden Hospital in Sutton, opening a new cancer ward there, a £70 million cancer ward. And, that was a patronage that he took on quite a few years ago now. And it was one that his mother had during her time. So I think his mother's heritage is very important to him. And so is this issue, and he feels really strongly about it. And I think, we're going to be hearing a lot more in the next couple of weeks about homelessness from Prince William. We know that even before he became Prince of Wales, back in 2021, he was starting to think about what could the Duchy of Cornwall estate do to house homeless people. And we've not heard a lot more since he became Duke of Cornwall. But I think we might hear a bit more about that soon.
But I guess lots of people are going to say, as you said, Richard, well, the royals have got lots of houses.
I think it's a difficult issue for them. I think it is tricky for them because as I mentioned, Apartment 1 at Kensington Palace. You've got Frogmore Cottage, which, if Harry and Meghan haven't formally vacated it yet, they're about to. So I was writing the other day about who's going to live there, and the palace just doesn't want to go there, even though it's part of the taxpayer-funded estate. There is Balmoral. When the king goes up to the Balmoral estate, he stays currently at Burke Hall. Will other members of the family use Balmoral? Will that remain empty? Will that be opened up more to the public? There are a number of properties on the royal estates, both private and the taxpayer-funded side, that I think make the royal family a bit vulnerable on this issue.
100%.
Of course, many people will give them a bit of leeway and say, well, that's just the royal family, and these are historic properties. You've got Buckingham Palace, for example. Will the king and the queen ever move into Buckingham Palace? Well, the official line from the royal household is yes.
It's funny because so many people do think that they do live there. Because when you think of the royal family, I think the first place that does come up into your head is Buckingham Palace.
Well, yeah, it's. I mean, around about 50% of all tourists who visit London go to stand outside Buckingham Palace and have their picture taken.
Yeah.
Because it's where the king lives in the public's mind. But except he doesn't. He and Queen Camilla are living at Clarence House when they're in London. They've sort of fudged that by when he's in residence in Clarence House, they fly the royal standard from both Clarence House and Buckingham Palace. But he's effectively just using it as an office at the moment. And yeah, many people think that they will never move in there. That will be a difficult conversation in 4 or 5 years' time. They turn around and say, actually, they've decided not to move in because a lot of public money has been spent on the monarch's quarters in the palace, and the king has had a say in the design of all of that.
Are they aware of these conversations which are going on, about them and about the royal family spending and about, I know that he's aware of the cost of living crisis, but does he understand that when he does go to these events, it does seem like quite a contrast to his actual life?
I'm sure, yes. I mean, they get briefed on it. They get press cuttings. I mean, I'm not sure how much time
they get press cuttings,
they all spend on reading the newspapers each day. But they get given a summary of what's in the press. I was going to say, actually, I can't remember if I mentioned this before. The king is not. He's not a stranger to criticising the press. I can remember going out to Basra in Iraq in 2004 to cover him visiting British troops there. It was a period when the fighting had been quelled up to a point, but it was still reasonably dangerous. And in fact, I seem to remember our helicopter taking some small arms fire, and heard him speak to, I can't remember, I think it was probably members of the parachute regiment, but I can't quite remember. Anyway, he made a speech to the to soldiers from the British Army there, and spent quite a bit of that time slagging off the British press and I did think, thanks, I've come out all this way
to make me feel well
for you. So, but he never went to the lengths that Harry and Meghan have done. So anyway, I digressed a little bit there.
Yes, indeed. And on to the rest of the week, Richard. Anything that's not embargoed that you can say?
Well, I mean, it's I suppose Saturday is the big day, Trooping the Colour. So we'll see virtually the entire family there, I think. So there'll be a lot of interest in the kids and certainly William and Kate, Edward and Sophie. Edward, as I say, riding for the first time. The King riding on horseback, becoming the first monarch to ride on horseback at Trooping the Colour ceremony since 1986, when the Queen, the late Queen, when Burmese, her horse, was retired. I think she decided it was time for her to retire from horse riding at the event as well. And so from then on, she...
Well, hopefully there's no thunderstorms, because I can imagine if there's thunderstorms, that won't be going ahead.
It'll go ahead, I'm sure. Yeah.
Even in thunder, even with spooking the horses.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Famous last words, Richard. Famous last words.
You'll be making the editor of the Sunday Express very nervous, thinking about a huge white space in his paper on Sunday.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm sure everything will go to plan. Okay, then. Well, that's something to look forward to this weekend. And you can, of course, see all of that coverage straight from Richard on his Twitter and in the paper, and, of course, on the site too. That brings this week's Royal Roundup to a close. We've got all of the playlist over on our YouTube, where we premiere there every single Friday. You can catch all the episodes on there, of course, on our Facebook playlist, our Instagram, and our Twitter. We are everywhere. You can follow at Royal Reporter for Richard's updates from when he goes to events. You can see the latest lines from there before we talk about it in depth on the programme. But Richard, thank you for coming on this week. Hopefully, we'll be back to Thursday normal timing next week. But if not, then just keep an eye on our Twitters and we'll make you aware of when we are going live. Richard, thank you. And we'll catch you next week.